Hello and welcome to World Talks with me, Ashim Kumar. Today we examine Armenia after Nikol Pashinyan's civil contract victory, a vote seen as endorsing Yerevan's cautious turn towards Europe while managing peace talks with Azerbaijan, normalization of relations with Turkey, economic exposure to Moscow, and new risks in the South Caucasus. Laying it all out for us, we're joined by Richard Giragosian. He's founding director of Regional Studies at the Regional Studies Centre. Excuse me. Richard, welcome back, and thanks for taking the time. So, talk us through big picture terms the significance of this win by Pashinyan.
Well, there were several factors making Armenia's recent parliamentary election especially significant. First, and often underreported, is the fact that this was the country's third back-to-back genuinely free and fair election, essential to deepening democracy going forward. Second, there was undeniably a geopolitical context at play, but it was very much an election that gave the government not only a re-election, but a fresh mandate to continue its diplomatic engagement of its neighbors and normalization of relations with its neighbors.
Okay, so let's start with the mandate. Yes, the winning party did get the mandate, but pro-Russian parties won a combined 31% of the votes. That's a big number, and they will have representation in Parliament. So clearly there isn't that clear a divide, is there?
Well, it's a bit misleading. On paper, yes, the opposition made a fair showing, garnering a number of seats, but the opposition remains as divided and fragmented as ever. In fact, the two largest opposition parties are in many ways engaged in their own friction and tension as much as they are opposing the government. Former President Robert Kocharyan and Russian-Armenian oligarch Samvel Karapetyan, each of which feels entitled to be the one and only pro-Russian leader. So it's unlikely that they're going to be able to mount a united front against the government's policies going forward. However, we also see their entrance into parliament perhaps a positive development, where they have to play by the rules and become more constructive from within the system of governance instead of simply protesting the government from the streets.
Indeed. Now, that makes perfect sense, but it doesn't sound like Russia's quite ready to give up the game. We've got a quote here from Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova, who said there's a clearly broad demand within Armenian society for the steady development of Russian-Armenian ties. Now, that sounds like they want to keep a hand in what happens in Armenia. Would you agree?
Well, you raise a very good question and a very important. I do expect the newly elected government to actually reassure Moscow that Armenia remains a member of the Eurasian Economic Union. And for Russia, the real leverage here is economics and trade. It's no longer security. But I do think at the same time, EU membership is both unrealistic and has served more as a strategic bluff. But nevertheless, the Russian government during this election campaign was not directly supporting the opposition. It was rather increasing pressure on the incumbent government. So it's not as black and white as many in Brussels would paint it.
OK, so what is Armenia's way forward then, bearing in mind its relationship with Azerbaijan and with Turkey, which of course supports Azerbaijan, and its disappointment with Russia's lack of aid when they had to give up,
Nagorno-Karabakh.
No,
yes.
Thank you very much. Nagorno-Karabakh. So where does Armenia go now?
Well, as your question correctly pointed out, the challenges, the obstacles, the weakness that Armenia is forced to deal with is a painful post-war reality, especially as it validated Azerbaijan's use of force. However, I am optimistic. Armenia is now endowed with a greater degree of legitimacy and, most importantly, stability. So the strategy is in terms of Moscow following a transactional approach, a little more passive aggressive, if you will, but in terms of not unnecessarily provoking an overreaction by Russia. It's rather staking a delicate balance, while at the same time normalizing relations with Turkey and diplomatically engaging Azerbaijan are both efforts without any third party. For a long time, we've had the West and Russia involved, and it got nowhere. The process now has seen unprecedented positive developments and progress, much to the credit of the political will that was absent in the past. So overall, I'm optimistic, but you are quite correct in the question in noting the difficulties. It won't be easy.
Right. Well, what should the strategic context be? Because a balancing act is very rarely sustainable. Where should Armenia be heading? So, for example, are we talking about diversifying its economic relationships to be less dependent on Russia?
Realistically, it's more about diversification in foreign policy, diplomacy, and security partners. This is why, for example, Armenia's most recent new embassy opened in Oman, reflecting the enhanced strategic significance of the Gulf states for Armenia. And it's also diplomatic initiatives in the Asia-Pacific region in terms of not necessarily being caught in the paradigm of the West versus Russia over Ukraine, but diversifying or balancing enough partners. In the economic field, we're playing a weak hand better, but nevertheless, Armenia has opted to stay within the Eurasian Economic Union and try to salvage that arrangement, but also to make Armenia more important to Russia, especially as Russia is significantly less important to Armenia. The analytical question is what is done now, whether it's too little, too late, given the years of overdependence on Russia with previous Armenian governments and the economic and trade leverage that Russia still exerts over Armenia.
Right. Very briefly, if you would, the last question, Richard. Is there something that the EU can do to strengthen certainly economic ties with Armenia in the short to medium term?
Yes, the EU should adopt more conditionality, actually more incentives, but also in terms of pressure, in terms of encouraging real reform. What the EU should not do is turn the blind eye to shortcomings in democratic governance as we enter a new parliament.
OK, well, thank you as always, Richard, for your analysis, and have a good evening.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. And that brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Don't go away, lots more coming up. Goodbye.